Welcome to CFO Principles, the interview series where we explore how businesses are built. And today I'm talking to Balázs, who is the CEO of NewPush. NewPush is a cybersecurity services company that really is able to operate and serve customers who have a high stakes cybersecurity environment. And NewPush has been able to do something that has puzzled and has challenged most service businesses for a long time, which is adding a product component to their offering. And what that does, and the reason that this is interesting to me, is because whenever something like that is being accomplished, where you're able to have a service business and then add a product component to it, what that does is changes the economic structure of the environment altogether. And most importantly, it actually reduces the risk exposure of the business and increases the valuation. So the ROI is enormous for organizations that are able to execute this. And I'm really curious to hear Balázs tell us the story of how he's been able to achieve that. So Balázs, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have our conversation. I want to begin with the history of the company. If you could start with where the company has started, how and why.
Thank you for asking. This is actually kind of unique. We started about 20 years ago. And originally, our idea was to create a full service hosting company for smaller businesses that couldn't afford enterprise class infrastructure. And we saw that the technology was already there. And what this evolved into is what people today consider the cloud. So as we went and as we offered services for these smaller entities, we found that the smaller entities that really liked us were actually part of bigger structures. So it would be like innovating groups within IBM or Juniper or other household names. And in order for jumpstarting their new initiatives, they needed to work with some nimble engineering folks that could make it happen online. And as a result, very quickly, what happened is that we had contracts with large household names, and we basically ended up specializing in cybersecurity because the most important things for these larger organizations was to protect their assets, to protect what we were building for them. And while you can go to Amazon and Microsoft, Azure, and all those for really good high quality services of infrastructure as a service, what you will not get there out of the box is a very highly tuned cybersecurity solution around your initiative. So today we actually are not even having to offer the infrastructure itself because pretty much everybody moved to the cloud and the big cloud providers have the bulk of the market. And we're actually offering just the cybersecurity and compliance solutions mainly. And that's basically now 90% of our revenues.
And how do you structure that offering, right? Is this a managed service with the back-end product, or do you have kind of a ready deployable software where you do a little bit of kind of service on the back end? Because usually there's always a service component somewhere. It's just a matter of where the emphasis is. How do you structure it?
No, this is, again, a really great question because it has evolved. Over 20 years, we started by trying to be a fully managed service provider. And what we found is we had to build over and over again the same things for customers. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up building a product. And what was even more interesting that we encountered some CISOs, chief information security officers, that were doing the same thing. They were building, you take companies, and I'm just giving examples here, right? These are not, but you take a company like Lowe's or something like that may have, a CISO that has to build something very specialized for them. And then you talk to those guys and you compare notes and you're like, oh, well, we're building about the same thing. Mm-hmm. So partnering with few of these CIOs and CISOs, we actually developed a solution, a software as a service solution. We call the connective platform, which allows them to connect their cybersecurity solutions and have an overlay, basically, that allows to have a different view about cybersecurity. And just to basically get back to your question. So it can be a managed service, but you just buy whatever you want, because underneath this there is this software service that's an overlay. And very similar to when you're in sales, you can go to salesforce.com and just buy a few seats and manage your own CRM there.
Mhm.
Or you can, purchase additional services from some other companies to manage the whole thing for you, completely turnkey. So there's the whole kind of gamut there from one end to the other of the spectrum.
So going from a managed service to try and develop a product internally is a big task, right? And it sounds to me that there was at some point a pivotal kind of decision making process that had to be made, or realization had to occur. What was that time frame like? When did it come through for you in the life cycle of the business? And what were the conversations internally between you and your team like as you were doing that?
Well, I would say that there is two aspects to that. One is you always have to keep the customer's interest in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so because there was no product on the market like what we're building, and there was a need, so that was identified. And secondly, our customers really wanted it. And then third, you have to have, at some point you have to make a decision. People overuse maybe this quote from Elon Musk, that starting a business is like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. But you do have to have, at some point, have this willingness to stare into the abyss, because being a product company is completely different than being an MSP. If you're MSP, you're in a monthly recurring revenue, and you're spending money, but it's proportional to what you're bringing in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's less of a scary big investment. Certainly, if at the time we invested all the money in our product and we would have spent it on Bitcoin today, I'd be super rich, billionaire, retired on in the Bahamas. But regardless, I wouldn't exchange it for this adventure that we have done, because seeing how our product, especially today, is becoming super exciting for people. When you hear about these hacks like the SolarWinds Orion hack, etc., it just you have to be passionate about what you do, and not look at you could have gotten rich other ways, right?
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the investment that has to go into that, right? Because you pointed out a very key component in business owner's mind when you're going through that decision making process of like, that's a lot of money. And the business model, the economic model of having an MSP versus a product business is completely different. So there's an investment component that has to happen. Now, what did that look like for you? Did you choose to go out and raise external capital? Did you have was the business generating internal capital where you felt comfortable reinvesting that? How did you go about funding that transition into a product?
Well, the closest I could say, I guess I have to just cite Elon Musk, just because he's in the minds of everybody today. But I sold pretty much everything I have. I put everything I have into this, because I believe in the product, and then every penny profit we have, we turn back into the product. And I know I'm not alone. So I know that people, entrepreneurs, founders who believe in their product, they basically turn back everything they have because they believe in it. So that's basically what we did. But we are now and on the cusp, at a level of our growth, where we probably will be looking at some bigger investment. It's funny because in a previous conversation, you and I discussed on different levels of investment. So that's definitely what we're looking at. But we wanted to have a proof of the product market fit, because I believe the conversation with investors is totally different than when you just have an idea and some revenues, than when you already proven the product market fit and you have some some decent revenues. But that's just my feeling, and you can actually tell me from your perspective, from your experience, which one works better. I mean, I'm sure that there is no cookie cutter answer, but that's an interesting question I would have.
Yeah, so there's from my perspective, there's definitely no cookie cutter answer, but there's one answer that gives you the ability and the option to do a bootstrap approach to building out your product. So if you start with the product and you begin a heavy investment with the product, an initial outlay of capital has to come into the business from some sources. Normally, especially as what we're used to here in the US, it's you got to go to the VC and get some money. You got to go to an angel and get some money. You got to go to a bank and get some money, which is not very likely. But when you move from a MSP to a product, now you at least have operated your business for a little bit, and there's general cash being generated. So that same cash can then be used to hire an extra engineer or two and get them deployed onto the product. So that's really from a capital investment. It pretty much costs the same amount of money, but the mental approach and the ability that you have to do that is completely different. When you start with a product, you can't bootstrap it. It's just unless you convince somebody to work for free, which is difficult to do. And in terms of how much, right? I mean, an engineering team is going to cost you, I don't know, depending on the type of complexity of the product you have. Team of 10, easily 100, $200 plus $1,000 a month. And that's typically about a year of product dev, right? So if you have an organization that is able to generate that internally and feed that kind of beast that is required, then that's one way to do bootstrap business. But that's just from my perspective.
I understand. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it's kind of what I was feeling like, but it's better to hear it from an expert, honestly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the strategy that you deployed, and the infrastructure that you had to build to make this all happen, right? So you mentioned that you were able to land some key marquee contracts, and you kind of brushed over that as if it was like, oh, it just kind of happened. But it doesn't just happen. There's a big kind of strategic component that has to take place there. So tell me, how did you go about bringing on, especially at the beginning, those marquee type of clients that, and again, we don't need to know their names, but those larger customers? What was your customer acquisition strategy like?
Well, honestly, we didn't have one. I mean, we just basically grew word of mouth. All the founders came from large consulting firms and agencies, but we didn't take any client with us because we're all junior, right? So it's not like we were project managers with contacts or anything. We started literally from zero money and zero contacts, and we just grew word of mouth, and we're still growing more word of mouth than anything else, because especially in cybersecurity and compliance, you're dealing with very sensitive data, and it requires a very high level of trust. So when you're in a company like Dell, who purchases an MSP, et cetera, then you have the Dell name to be behind it. But when you have no brand name to be behind it, it has to be a very strong relationship. So that's basically how we're just now building our strategy, because we're not grown to the point where we need to multiply our pipeline by 10 for the next type of growth, where it doesn't happen word of mouth as much.
Yeah. And then you mentioned a couple of very interesting things there. You mentioned the trust component, and trust. Like, I spend an enormous amount of time in my team talking about trust, and sometimes I feel like I'm getting through. Other times I feel like I'm preaching to a wall. But talk about a little bit about how is it that you're able, and how do you think about trust building process with your prospects, right? To go from not knowing somebody to them becoming your customer and trusting you with their data, with their security, with, quite frankly, putting an enormous amount of liability exposure into, a service provider like this. How do you go about building that trust? What are some of the components?
Yeah, so just circling back, growing word of mouth, what it does for us is that there is already an introduction. So it's almost like somebody vouches for you. So you're thinking about, Clubhouse, for example. You can't just sign up for Clubhouse. Somebody has to vouch for you and invite you, use one of their invitations for you on Clubhouse. So it's a similar situation that you already have somebody vouching for you, so you don't start from zero. That's from zero to the first step is that person that refers you. And then after that, we have a process to build trust that we refined with some very, very smart people that helped us along the way. And it kind of goes like this. You have an initial meeting on which you really just try to learn more about your potential customer, potential relationship that you can help, and after that, what we do is we're not solutioning anything. What we're doing is just basically writing up a summary of, okay, this is what we learned from you, and this is how we understood the problem that you're facing. This is kind of how we understand your mandate, and this is how we understand what you've already tried so far, and what you might be willing to try as maybe changing direction or improving things. And simply we just send that back basically for having a next meeting, before the next meeting. And when people read this, people are very busy these days, so some people don't even read your summary. But when they read it before the next meeting, the relationship already increased tremendously, because they feel like, okay, they're heard. These guys are not just trying to sell me something. They really are listening to what I had, what my situation was, etc. And then the second meeting is what we call more of a deep dive, where we really go deeper in the topic that they have, and we build our the demonstration of our expertise with them. So once we built up that expertise, then the third stage is, if they feel like there is common ground, that they were, we would like to see how this works, what you're talking about. And so we would then go to the next stage, which would be a demo. Okay. And then at that point, people are like, okay, I totally get it. I want this, I need it yesterday, where do I sign? And that's, we can jumpstart. But for really very large deals, multi-million-dollar deals, there are other steps to go through. And one of them is basically to do a test drive, and this is where we usually can edge out our competition, because in the best case scenario, our competition will do a proof of concept or a proof of value, but you would be surprised how much in compliance and cybersecurity people are not willing to even do that, because it's so complex to do, takes so much effort and engineering talent, that they just don't want to put that much effort. They're going to go on to the next sale where they can make the sale easier. And again, a big brand like IBM or Dell, they can afford to do that. For us, we're going all the way. We're basically, if they want a test drive, and we don't call it proof of concept or proof of value, because we already know it works. So we're basically handing it to you, take a test drive, okay? It's for you to actually see that it works, because we don't need to prove the concept. So we do a test drive, and then, before the test drive, we follow similar steps that you would do in a proof of concept, that you agree, what do you want to see? Like, does it need to accelerate to 100 miles per hour in under 3 seconds? Or does it need to, go 1,000 miles with, 1 tank of fuel or whatever, But you say all of these things that it need to be, that they expect from us to prove. And then there's a test drive. And at the end of the test drive, we have 100% success rate. But it's also because what we claim is so unbelievable that when they say we really can do it, and one of the jokes I often tell is that we're the number one choice of the people who are trying for a second time, Because the first time you go see an HP and Dell and IBM and all those guys will come, the sales guys will say, "Oh yeah, we can do everything. You look at our marketing documentation. Check, 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 a bunch of check marks." But they don't tell you that there are some conditions under which those check marks work. Okay. And for us, we say, well, we don't want you to find out later that it doesn't work. We will do the test drive for you and you'll see if it works or doesn't work. And interestingly, sometimes, it goes so well that they're like, okay, let's throw a curveball. Now let's do, can you stop within 10 feet? I'm taking the car analogy. As you can tell, I like fast cars, but so, and then, we slam on the brake and they're like, shit, it did. Yeah, it worked. So then at that point, after a few curveballs that we got that were not agreed ahead of time, you really have the trust that goes from here to way up. And that's really what allows you to sign a large deal, because the risk factor for the person who's going to have to sign off on that deal just went down to very, very low. Okay. And on top of that, you have to have all the certifications, of course. You have to have, for health institutions, HIPAA high trust. You have to have SOC 2. You have to have, all those different certifications for the type of industry that you're dealing with. So those are check marks you have to also do, but they also increase the trust. So that's basically in a nutshell. So I don't know how we're doing in time, but I hope I didn't use up too much for that question.
No, I want to spend a little bit more time on this actually, because it's the way that, and I typically won't be sharing this, but in this particular case, I want to share. The way that I think about trust is I try to envision a little piggy bank, because I remember when I was a kid, I had a little piggy bank that I would put money into, right? And the more money you had in there, the more like you could go out and buy. So today, I think about trust in a similar format. Whenever I engage with somebody at the very very beginning, the piggy bank is blank, right? There's nothing in it. So the more interaction you have, the more care you present, the more genuine, quite frankly, and human you are, and truthful in the interaction, the more trust you can build. And at the end of the day, the amount of money you have in your little piggy bank, that trust money, we'll call it, is actually a highly influential component when you get around to talking about, now let's talk money. Now let's put ink on paper and let's engage in some sort of like, let me sell you the product, or let me sell you the X, Y, and Z. The more you have in your piggy bank, the more of that you can be able to exchange on the back end. Now, it's a bit of a cynical way to think about things, but in my mind, that's how it works. So it's interesting from your perspective, like everything that you just mentioned, I'm correlating to my little like, okay, coin in the piggy bank, coin in the piggy bank, coin in the piggy bank, all along the line. So very, very interesting component there. Now, let me ask you about this, because you had mentioned competition. How do you go around and how do you go through the natural occurrence that happens even when you sell a product or a service, there's a natural commoditization that happens over time within an engagement. So let's say you land your customer and you're doing fantastic for them. Let's say you've had them around for 2 to 3 years, and then they come back and say, hey, you know us, blah, 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 but I just have some internal pressures. Can we decrease the price? Have you had to experience commoditization, because that's how we refer to it? And how do you tackle that challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually in technology, it's, I would say every 3 years in technology is like 100 years. Okay. So every 3 years you have to completely reinvent yourself. I mean, some people, tend to forget today, you take Amazon, Jeff Bezos, he's the darling of Wall Street and all that. But you tend to forget that less than 10 years ago or about 10 years ago, maybe a little over 10 years ago, Amazon lost 90% of its value. So, everybody kind of remembers the rosy picture, but not the tough moments. And the tough moments, the way you survive them is by you have to really reinvent yourself. There's no other way. And in technology, I think that every 3 years you have to come up with radically new things that will shift the conversation. You're right; those things that you sold 3 years ago, they become commodities. So you have to be able to make those prices very attractive. You have to be able to automate. You have to be able to bring in the new technologies, whether it's low code, no code solutions, all sorts of things that can drive some profit, increase profit margin that gives you more leeway to reduce the top line on those services. And those companies that can't do that, I think that they go the way of IBMs or Intels, that kind of stick to their guns and small. If it's a smaller company, they just go out of business completely. An IBM and an Intel will stay here still for decades because they're so huge that even if they don't matter as much as technical innovators, they're still around, right? Mm-hmm. But small companies, if you make that mistake, you're out of business.
That's an interesting. Innovation as a tool to fight the natural commoditization that happens. And by the way, that happens in both. Like when I talk to entrepreneurs, sometimes there's not a really. I oftentimes don't see them understanding that eventually there's going to be price pressures on the product, and they go into the market and they're like, "Oh yeah, $100,000, $500,000 for my product because it's so amazing." And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you're getting charged. You're only able to get 50,000. But very interesting. So thank you for that. Now let's talk a little bit, shift gears and talk a little bit about the future. How do you view the current economic environment that we're in, right? We're obviously hopefully it seems like we're getting over the pandemic. Big challenges for a lot of businesses. How do you see the evolution of and the restructuring of the economic conditions that we're seeing here? And how do you think that it's going to affect your business?
I think that the post-pandemic world is going to be, and I mean, I'm not alone, so this is not like some big oracle speaking here, but I tend to agree with those point of views where there is a new world we're entering. So it's not going to be like before the pandemic, but it's not going to be like during the pandemic. But I think many people will think twice about, okay, do I really need to take this airplane ride? Or do I really need to have so many people in the office all the time, etc. So I see that changes. And the programs, the IT programs that have been accelerated by necessity, they actually will open up a lot of opportunity, especially in cybersecurity, because people will not wind back down those IT programs. It's not like you're going to uninstall all the remote capabilities you have. You're not going to wind down your online shops, etc. Because they were already on your roadmap. You just accelerated the roadmap. And with the acceleration, maybe you cut some corners that you have to tidy up. Because the attackers are there. So in my industry, I think we will have a continued growth to stabilize what's acquired, what has been acquired during the pandemic from an IT transformation perspective. In many places, it needs to be stabilized. There's a lot of things that have been put in place with less automation that probably people wanted to do. So there's going to be a lot of automation capability. And I think a lot of management was exposed to a lot of new technologies that intrigued them now, and they may want to do more of it because they see how effective the workforce can become if it's used right. And I'm seeing people play more with RPA, robotic process automation, with low code and no code technologies. With process automation, which is different than RPA. So all these technologies, I see that they will have a new resurgence. And so I'm very optimistic. I'm basically very optimistic that this new post-pandemic world is actually going to be better for everybody. I mean, I just wish, of course, for that tragedy that rocked people's lives with the lost ones, or some people had really debilitating versions of this COVID. It's I mean, that obviously that's not something that we can wish on anyone. But now that it has been a fact, I think overall we're humans, we're strong, and we'll come out of it stronger. And that's what I see as we'll come out of it.
Great. Now, so you're seeing opportunities, especially for your industry.
Yeah, I see opportunities for all industries because everybody was forced to look at technology harder, and sometimes there's a little bit of a hump, an investment hump, and people try to stay before it and not bite the bullet to invest. And this pandemic forced a lot of people to invest and go over the hump. So now that they're over the hump, the incremental investments over the hump, the ROI is better and better. Sometimes it's hard to see the ROI because you don't want to bite the bullet, but once you did, it becomes better. So I see that. I mean, of course, I can't speak about the stock market because the pricing of stocks and all that, I don't know how that works really in this day and age. But from the actual value that technology drives, I see that we're over a hump of IT transformation that will drive a lot more transformation now.
Yeah, I personally agree with you. I think there's every time there's a shakeup, and again, I agree with you. The tragic from many perspectives, but from a business perspective, um, every shakeup comes with opportunities, and it's just a matter of being able to adapt. Now, let's hone in a little bit about the piece of your business, which I know is crucially important, but we haven't touched up on yet, and I want to do it in the context of looking toward the future. Now, how, in your particular a NewPush, how have you structured your team, and how do you foresee that? And how have you changed and adapted for the team, with the exception of obviously, everybody's being remote because that I imagine that was the case. But how have you tackled things like performance management? How have you tackled things like making sure that expectations are clear? How have you tackled things like recruiting and getting people excited and maintaining the culture of the organization in the context of us not shaking hands every day like we used to?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question actually, because I just have a hunch that you and I probably a year ago started researching like crazy. How are we gonna handle that?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we didn't know each other a year ago, but that was something that we really thought hard. The first part came, I would say, maybe 3 months into the pandemic, because or sorry, 3 months into the lockdown, because that was the longest lockdown. Humans are not made to be locked down, and that caused a lot of mental issues. People needing to spend, you're within your space, but people are within your space, and even if it's your family, it's different, and everything is different, and so more pressure, more stress on the work, or maybe more stress because your spouse actually now stopped being a breadwinner because the type of job they had was their shop closed or whatever. So there's a lot of pressures or indirect pressures that basically made this little unit a pressure cooker, right? And so we had to deal a lot with thinking about mental health and how do we help our employees with that, and from getting puppies to all sorts of things that we brainstormed together. And I think just the fact that we brainstormed, just that everybody saw that we care about what's happening in itself, what had a positive impact. And Yeah, I mean, now it's been a year, so it's almost like I can't remember all of those different things that we did. What I can remember is that we all put our heads together to really think hard about constantly things we could do. I mean, part of it is improving all the technologies around remote work. The other aspect of your question was, the type of people, and we're a small company, so we're less than 50, right? If we take all of the contractors and everybody who works together on projects, maybe we're 100. Okay, so with that, we it's different than a larger organization. Okay, so what I'm going to say only applies to us, but essentially, we're in this phase when Google was very small, where Google hired like basically only elite people, only A players as they call it, and the A players made sure that they only hired A players because it's basically, they know that if they hire someone who needs more direction, it would slow them down, and it would hurt our ability to achieve our goals. So this effect made it that for us it's easier to get through uh, a situation where there's such a structural change, because we have people that already are capable of working without structure and working through incredible growth in our sector. So we were a little lucky on that, and we already had a lot of remote work. What the one thing we really miss, all of us, I can tell you, is that 3 times a year from all over the world. It was from the Americas, North America, South America, all over Europe. We would all converge in one place, and we would all meet in person. And it was our hackathon, and everybody was heads down. But we would and we would organize these events 3 times a year, and these events became virtual, and that was maybe the thing that hit us the hardest. But you can tell that this is other companies had much bigger problems, so we can't really complain that this was our biggest problem, that the 3 times a year hackathon that we used to do in person, we couldn't do it. And our special event where we invited some industry experts, industry leaders to talk, again, we had to reorganize it. We split it up into 3 1-hour sessions, over 3 weeks, 3 times a year. Again, these are adjustments we made. I think we overall got very lucky because we were already all set up for this remote work, for the ability to to work without as much face to face. Having said that, personally, it was a huge change for me, because in when was it, 2019, I flew 300,000 miles. In 2020, I flew, when the first part of 2020, I still flew enough to to make my status, but it's crazy. Like after the pandemic hit, I just flew like, I had one trip that I had to do no matter what, and that was my one trip for the whole pandemic time. So in the last 12 months, I had just one trip, as opposed to flying 300,000 miles a year. So for me, it was a huge change, and for some of my team who also had to fly a lot, I had some Canadian colleagues that were coming to the US, every other week, things like that. We don't have to do that. But that's, again, I think that I need to be careful when I say that, because a lot of people had huge problems. So I can't say that is a problem. It's just a change.
All right. So thank you. Last question that I always like to ask: as you're looking out towards the future, as you're looking out at the economy, the world in general, your business, your team, what are the things that, one, excite you, and 2, scare you?
One that excites me and one that scares me.
Yep.
Well, for me, it's the same.
Okay.
So I'm very, very excited about our product, because our team is coming up with a roadmap for this year. which and we already delivered. The year is almost a quarter done, and we delivered so much new features. Just yesterday, one of my lieutenants was showing some new customization features on our admin dashboard to for managers to be able to track some processes more fluidly. And so this product, I feel like we're building something revolutionary. So it's very exciting. But I would close on what Elon Musk said. Being an entrepreneur and a new product, it doesn't matter if it's big like PayPal or Tesla, or it's like our cybersecurity tool. It's still like chewing glass and staring into the abyss.
Well said. Well said. Well, Balázs, I want to thank you for your time. This was an absolutely amazing and insightful conversation. I appreciate it, and I wish you all the best and hope to speak soon. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Luis. My pleasure.